HOA tried finding me, but what they didn't know is that I control their HOA's bank loans. Yes, the same loans that keep their community project alive, their swimming pools running, and their fancy landscaping paid for. They thought they had power over me, but the truth is, I hold the strings that tie their money together. They came after me with letters, notices, and threats. They thought they were scaring me. They thought they could bully me into paying fines I didn't even deserve. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't just another homeowner they could push around. I wasn't the type to sit quietly and accept their rules. I knew something they didn't know, and that gave me power. You see, HOAs love to act tough. They love to send out fines for the smallest things. Maybe your grass is an inch too tall. Maybe your trash can stay out one night longer than it should. Maybe you park your car a little crooked. Suddenly, you're the bad guy, and they're the sheriff of the neighborhood. That's how they operate. Fear, control, pressure. But fear only works on people who feel powerless. And I was not powerless. Let me take you back to the moment it all started. I remember standing on my front porch, holding one of their letters in my hand. The paper was stiff. The words were bold. They accused me of breaking some ridiculous rule. They said I owed them money. And if I didn't pay, they would keep adding more fines, more penalties, and eventually they'd try to put a lien on my house. For a second, I felt anger boiling inside me. For another second, I felt the weight of injustice pressing down. But then I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. See, my job isn't normal. I'm not just an employee. I'm not just a random worker. I work with banks. And not just with banks. I handle loans. Big loans. The type of loans HOAs depend on when they want to build, upgrade, or repair. You know those new tennis courts they brag about? Those fancy gates they put up? The landscaping they show off to make the community look rich? None of that comes free. They need money. And when they don't have it, they borrow. And when they borrow, they deal with me. That's the hook right there. They thought they could trap me with their rules. But the trap they set was one I had built for them years ago. Because the money they rely on passes through my hands. And when you control the money, you control everything. I didn't tell them right away. I didn't rush to reveal my power. Instead, I let them keep playing their little game. Every letter they sent, I read it carefully. Every threat they wrote, I tucked it away. I was collecting their arrogance. I was letting them show me who they really were. Because that's the thing with power. The more they think they have, the more reckless they become. And the more reckless they become, the easier it is to turn the tables. Days turned into weeks, and the fines kept stacking up, at least on paper. But here's what they didn't know. Their HOA board was already on shaky ground. Their finances weren't as stable as they pretended. They were borrowing heavily for projects. And those loans? Yeah, those loans were under my control. Without me, their projects would stall. Their upgrades would freeze. Their promises to community would fall apart like a sandcastle in the tide. I remember the first meeting I had with one of the banks about their account. The numbers were right there in front of me. Their balance sheet wasn't strong. Their payments were tight. They needed every dollar financing just to keep their image alive. And I thought to myself, if only they knew who they were messing with. It was almost funny. Here they were, flexing on me with little fines, while I sat quietly, knowing I could pull the rug from under their entire budget. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, about justice, about teaching bullies a lesson. They thought they had the upper hand, but in reality, I had the final card. And the more they pushed me, the more determined I became to play it. But here's where the story gets even better. I wasn't the only one they were mistreating. Oh no, I started talking to my neighbors, and you wouldn't believe the stories I heard. One family was fined because their kid left a bike in the driveway overnight. Another neighbor got hit with penalties because their flowers didn't match the community colors. Someone else was being harassed for having a small flag in their yard. These weren't crimes. These weren't real issues. These were just excuses for the HOA to flex power. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my fight. This was bigger. This was about standing up to a system that had gotten too comfortable with abusing authority. And suddenly, I felt even stronger. because I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending my community. The board loved to walk around with clipboards, pointing fingers at everyone. They loved to act like kings of the neighborhood. But kings only stay in power when the people stay silent. And I wasn't silent anymore. Neither were my neighbors. I started sharing with them what I knew. I told them about the loans. I told them about the power I had. And slowly word spread. The board thought they had control. But behind the scenes, the people were waking up. Now, I won't lie. There were moments when I wondered how far I should go. Should I really pull the plug on their financing? Should I really shake the ground under their feet? Because once I made that move, there was no going back. But then I remembered all those letters, all those threats, all those times they tried to intimidate me. And I realized this wasn't just business. This was personal. The turning point came when they sent me a final warning. The letter said if I didn't pay immediately, they would begin the process of putting a lien on my property. Can you believe that? A lien over a fine that was never fair in the first place. That was the last straw. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I picked up the phone. I called the bank, and I said, "We need to talk about the HOA loan." Silence followed, then questions, then urgency, because when someone like me makes that call, people listen. I explained the situation. I explained the risk. I explained how this HOA was operating. And suddenly, the tables turned. The bank wasn't looking at me as a homeowner anymore. They were looking at me as a key player in their financial game. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The next HOA meeting was different. I walked in, and they looked at me with the same arrogance as before. But this time, I didn't sit quietly. I didn't let them talk down to me. I stood up and I said, "You've been trying to find me. You've been threatening me. But let me make something clear. Without me, your loans collapse. Without me, your projects freeze. Without me, your entire board struggles to function. I didn't do it to scare them. I didn't do it to brag. I did it to remind them of reality. Respect goes both ways. You can't bully people without consequences. You can't treat homeowners like trash when you're standing on shaky financial ground. And when you mess with the wrong person, the person holding the keys to your survival, you learn humility real fast. And that, my friend, was only the beginning. Because what came next wasn't just about me and my fines. It was about reshaping the power in our community. It was about standing up for every family they had mistreated. And trust me, the story only gets crazier from here. The board thought the shock I gave them at that meeting was the end of the story. They thought if they stayed quiet for a little while, I'd cool off and things would go back to normal. But they didn't understand. That meeting was just a spark. The fire had only started burning, and once the truth began spreading, there was no stopping it. My neighbors were watching. People who had stayed silent for years suddenly felt like they had a voice. They saw me stand up to the board. They saw me speak the truth. They were too afraid to say out loud. And in that silence, in that room where the board sat pale and speechless, the entire community felt a shift. It was no longer them against us. It was us against them. The next day, I had people knocking on my door. They wanted to talk. They wanted to share their stories. They wanted to fight back too. One neighbor told me about how she was fined for painting her shutters the wrong shade of blue. Another explained how the board threatened him over a cracked driveway. These weren't acts of crime. These were acts of control. And people were tired. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me or about a single loan or a handful of fines. This was about freedom, about dignity, about stopping a group of power-hungry people from thinking they owned every soul in the neighborhood. And once I understood that, I knew I couldn't stop. I had to push harder. The board tried to act tough again. They sent another round of letters. This time, though, the tone was different. Less confidence, more desperation. They wrote long paragraphs about community standards and rules for the greater good. But it was clear they were nervous. They were shaken because they knew I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a homeowner with the power to pull their foundation apart brick by brick. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with calm. Calm scares bullies more than shouting ever will. I wrote back short notes. Simple sentences. I am aware of my rights. I will not pay unjust fines. Your financial standing is under review. Every word I wrote was a reminder that their days of control were numbered. But here's the part that really flipped everything upside down. The bank started asking questions. Not to me, but to them. The loan officers who had always trusted their reports began digging deeper. They wanted proof. They wanted records. They wanted explanations for why certain things weren't adding up. And who do you think put that doubt in the bank's head? Me. With a single phone call, I turned the spotlight directly on the HOA board. And under that spotlight, their cracks started showing. Meetings grew tense. The board started arguing among themselves. Some members wanted to back down, to let things go, to stop targeting me. Others, too proud, wanted to double down. They thought if they just pushed harder, maybe I'd break. But here's the thing about leverage. Once you have it, you don't need to break. You just wait. You let the other side crumble under their own weight. And crumble they did, slowly, piece by piece. The more questions the bank asked, the more pressure built. The more pressure built, the more mistakes they made. And every mistake was another thread unraveling their control. But I wasn't just sitting back. I was talking to neighbors, organizing, sharing information. We started documenting everything. Every unfair fine, every aggressive letter, every ridiculous rule. We built a record so strong, it became undeniable. What was once whispers behind closed doors was now a roar echoing through the community. People started showing up at board meetings not to listen, but to challenge. Homeowners who had once been afraid to even speak up were now raising their voices. And I'll never forget the look on the board president's face the night. 20 of us stood in unison and demanded answers. His hands shook. His words stuttered, because he realized in that moment the fear they had built their empire on was gone. And when fear disappears, power follows. At the same time, the bank tightened its grip. They began delaying approvals. They started limiting funds. The HOA projects that were once their pride and joy came to a screeching halt. That shiny new playground they promised? On hold. The expensive landscaping plan? Frozen. The new community center? Canceled. And all of it, every single delay, led back to one simple fact. The board messed with the wrong person. But the most satisfying part? They knew it. They knew they had done this to themselves. They knew they had provoked the very person who held the keys to their financial lifeline. And with every stalled project, every broken promise, their image of power crumbled in front of the entire neighborhood. The board tried one last desperate move. They sent me a personal letter, this time not full of threats, but full of pleas. They wanted to work things out. They wanted to find a solution. Suddenly, the same people who once acted like they owe me were begging me to meet them halfway. And I laughed, not because I enjoyed their suffering, but because it was proof that justice had finally arrived. I didn't want revenge. I wanted fairness. So I told them, drop the fines, drop the threats, start treating homeowners with respect, stop abusing your power. That was my condition. That was the deal. And if they refused, well, they already knew what would happen. And for the first time in years, the board agreed, not because they wanted to, not because they suddenly cared, but because they had no choice. That day, I walked through my neighborhood with a different feeling. It wasn't just pride. It wasn't just victory. It was relief. Relief that people finally saw the truth. Relief that bullies have been exposed. Relief that ordinary families could finally breathe without fear of another pointless letter showing up in their mailbox. But the biggest lesson? Power isn't about money or titles or rules. Power is about knowledge, about courage, about refusing to let anyone treat you less than human. They thought they could bury me in fines. Instead, I buried their control under the weight of truth. And here's what I want you to take away. You don't have to work at a bank to stand up for yourself. You don't have to control loans to fight back. All you need is to know your worth. All you need is to believe that no one has the right to bully you, no matter how official their letterhead looks. When you stand tall, others will stand with you. And together, you can bring down even the biggest giants. So what happened to my HOA? They still exist, but they're not the same. They don't send out petty fines anymore. They don't walk around with clipboards trying to scare people. They know better now. Because once you pull the mask off a bully, they lose their power forever. And my community, we're stronger than ever. Neighbors who barely spoke now greet each other with smiles. People who once felt alone now feel connected. And every time I walk past the board office, I smile because I know the truth. I know who really holds the power, not them, but us. Backhand index pointing, right? If you've ever been pushed around, if you've ever been unfairly fined, if you've ever felt powerless against a system that seems too big, remember this story. Share it. Let it remind you that you're not as powerless as they want you to believe. Stand tall, fight back, and don't ever let fear control your life.